all businesses have those pages. They all have a page that competes with your sales page. But the ones that have survived through the pandemic, the ones that have been watching and listening and learning, have been using tools like Answer the Public, or using the questions filter in SEMrush, right? They've been using upper funnel content to drive brand awareness, to trigger remarketing, to build their email lists, to build their social following so that they can create content that will be seen by wider audiences and remind one-time visitors to come back and become a customer later on. Those other businesses just kept complaining as their ranking goes down. Well, I used to rank, just get it to rank again. Well, it's not as simple as that. We have to look at what's driving additional traffic. And it's like, well, I don't want all that useless traffic. I want customers. Well, that useless traffic is going to link to your website when they share content they find really helpful. They're going to reference it in articles that they create. Some of them college students on college websites, some of them government officials on government websites, domains that Google gives a little bit more trust to. So I think the ones that survived took the time to identify, putting a full information architecture together of all the different ways that people are searching for, what they do and the attributes of how, when, what, and where, and why they do them.
Welcome to the B2B Digital Marketer Podcast, a podcast helping you to end your struggle with digital marketing, helping you to pave a new and better path to target and capture your ideal customer. Each week, we teach you how insiders and experts debunk the dreary and become engines of innovation. Now, here's your host, Jim Rembach.
Okay, B2B DM gang, and I'm excited today because we're going to talk about a big gap that exists in your marketing. And because we have Steve Wiideman on the show with us today. Steve, welcome.
Hey, Jim. Thanks for having me.
Okay, so to kick this off, what do B2B digital marketers need to be thinking today?
I think B2B digital marketers really need to be thinking about what their key performance indicators are. They need to be thinking about what their roadmap looks like for the next 12 to 24 months. I think they need to stop doing things and start really kind of, mapping out each of the different areas that we need to focus on specifically for inbound marketing, right? What is our technical roadmap to improve our website, and what are our KPIs that we're going to measure based on those changes? What are our KPIs for our content strategy? And, what pages do we need to continue to nurture and move up in the results? And what new pages can we create to support that? Where do we need to be getting visibility off of our website that Googlebot and Bingbot are going to find and help with, how they rank our website? And then ultimately, how do we marry some of our paid and organic search data, to help build the strategy for both, for all our content strategy and what we're doing off the website? I think that's, for me, when I look at, what B2B marketers are doing, or what they could be doing a little bit better, is having a strategy. And I think that's the message I would convey.
Well, and I'm looking forward to us to getting into a little bit more of the particulars about that, because you and I even had some discussion that's directly tied, to that strategy and the people who are needed to execute it. And we'll get into that. But before we do, if you could tell the B2B DM gang a little bit about your background and the expertise that you're bringing to this discussion.
Absolutely. So I've been in search for about 22 years now. I have a degree in e-business management. My corporate experience was a little bit more in the B2C side of things, working with Disney parks and resorts online. I also did a lot of B2B work. In the earlier days, I was working with agencies. I still help and support and train a lot of digital marketing agencies that want to up their game in search, or help carry the weight if they lose their in-house SEO team or person who's running it. Will come in and kind of support them and help them, bring in a new SEO person. So I also teach at Cal State Fullerton and UC San Diego, and a few classes at Fullerton Community College as a moonlighting thing I like to do to kind of give back to the industry. And I just published a textbook for a software system called Stukent, and the courseware is used by colleges, around the country for students that are taking a certificate program in digital marketing. So I've been in search for a while and finally published, and I've been teaching for about 3.5 years now.
Well, I mean, and so there's two different types of publishing, right? There's a difference when you start doing academic publishing versus, actually doing it for a general population.
Oh yeah, we've got to write lecture slides for students and for professors. We've got to do lesson plans. We create quizzes. There's a simulation program that's going to parallel the book so that you can actually do SEO and practice it, through a simulation system. So yeah, it's a lot more than just writing 15 chapters of a textbook. It's it's the digital component for the learning experience. Yeah, you nailed it.
Well, even when you start talking about that, I start thinking about the really the academic rigor associated with it. I mean, you have to have site sourcing, and you have to have an approval process that just oftentimes just doesn't exist. When you
it was a year. It took a year. It was a lot of work.
Yeah.
So yeah, definitions and references, and yeah.
So I mean, that's impressive, and I think that's thanks for sharing that, because it's really important. So when we start talking about this, it really is the separation between some of the things that we often see, in the digital or online marketing space, the SEO space,
Right.
a search engine management space, all of that. And that's something that you address that I read. You talk about inexperienced practitioners, versus those that have deep domain expertise. And
Right.
you said it, and you state that many of the inexperienced practitioners that are out there, and we see them. I mean, there's literally thousands. I mean, and when you start talking about going offshore, there's tens of thousands, if not millions, but they're working off of 2005 techniques. If you can't explain that a little bit.
Sure, and I'm partially to blame for that. My first ebook was the 4 layers of the SEO model in 2005, and we can't remove things from the internet that we don't own. So unfortunately, I can't retract any of the things that I was teaching in those books prior to, all the updates that search engines have made over the last, 11 years since we did that. Well, no, 16 years. So it's unfortunate that, that's those folks that are learning digital marketing will punch in a query to try to learn something. They'll find some free ebook or a document that was created 10, 15 years ago. And unfortunately, technology evolves, and the way that search engine algorithms change, it's not appropriate to use something that's, I would say, greater than 3 years. If it's greater than 3 years, you might want to double check the facts in it before you put that into your checklist of things that you want to start working on. So I think it's paramount, to make sure that you're using strategies that are developed, recently, so that that it's not going to work against you. So we made suggestions, for example, again, 15 years ago, where we would say, hey, let's make sure we put the keywords that we want this page to rank for, in the first paragraph, and put a link in it. And then since it's a blog post, let's submit it to all these different blog aggregators that will consume that content. And if they consume HTML, we'll get a backlink every time we do it. Well, in 2011, Google came in and they said, hey, we're just basically going to ignore some of this duplicate content. Once we know who the originator is, all those other, pages that have that content are kind of going to get ignored. And the links that are in them, if they're all similar or the same or have the same anchor text, now we're going to ignore those as well. So the techniques that we used in the wild west of SEO, before there were guidelines and link schemes advice and Google developer documents that we can refer to. When it was the wild west, we tried everything we could to try to manipulate search results. And now as ethical SEOs, we have to now think about best practices and guidelines. And since you mentioned quotes, my favorite, is what we use when we're talking to our clients is from Jim Rohn, and that you don't have to do extraordinary things to be successful. You only have to do ordinary things extraordinarily well. So now, instead of trying to game the system by shoving keywords into our pages, Instead, we look at the pages that show up on the first page and we make sure ours is more helpful. It loads faster. It can get a user through an experience quicker. It's more accessible. It manages security and privacy and accessibility. It's got a prominent call to action so the user doesn't have to try to figure out what they should be clicking on. So we look at all of those learned best practices through experience and through advice from other experts on how we make our pages better, as opposed to finding shortcuts and techniques and hacks like we had to do before there were guidelines.
Well, okay. So you said something, and I know sometimes we just kind of get in a habit of saying them, but I want to challenge you on something. And please tell me if I'm off base a little bit. But you had mentioned something about if we're using information from 3 years ago, that maybe it's outdated. And then I start thinking of, well, Google, actually changed to make, mobile first. Then we also had, some changes associated with, cookies. I mean, there's some changes that actually have happened just even within the past year that I'm like, is 3 years really it?
Sure. So again, you check your list, talk to an expert and say, hey, in my current list, this is what I want to look at. And a lot of them are principle based, right? As you look at your technical audit template, some of them just make sense. Some of them are things like proving expertise, authority, and trust. Some of them are things like security. You need to make sure that your site's secure. That's not going to change, right? Some of them are sort of principle-based things that aren't going to change. But some of them, like you'd mentioned, are constantly evolving. Even as we speak, they're rolling out a page experience update that's going to affect websites that haven't addressed what Google's calling their core web vitals. So was it about a year and a half ago, 2 years ago, maybe they introduced new attributes that you could put on links to specify, not just to not get penalized for linking to a website, but now you can specify whether it's a sponsored link, whether it is user generated content, or if you're unsure, you could still just leave the, rel equals no follow to tell the crawlers, hey, don't follow this link. And if you do, don't count it against my page for linking linking to that other website. So I think there's circumstances for sure where you do want to make sure you're running it by another expert or throwing it into a group of peers in a social group that you're in. I think I have like 3 different Slack groups that I'm in of my peers, and probably 6 different groups I'm in social media of people that I trust that are sort of in that, like you mentioned, kind of upper echelon of SEOs that I trust. And so if I'm troubleshooting, here's how you know is if you're ranking well, then you know that the work that you did what it was supposed to do. But if you're not ranking well and you've done everything on your list of things that you would do to get your page to rank well, that's when you go back to that expert and say, hey, is something I'm doing outdated or changed? And someone might come back and say, yeah, you didn't know Google's latest core update affects how your site ranks based on how many times you're mentioned off the website in correlation to those keywords, as opposed to it being just links. And you're like, I totally missed that. I've been so focused in this last month on this other project that I missed that core update and what it affected. And your peers are like, well, that's what we're here for, man. Right. So it's always great to have that, but following that best practice list until it stops working for you, it should be sort of your going list.
Well, as you're saying that, I think there's a lot of, oh gosh, I think this is kind of bringing in what we were talking about earlier off mic, so I want to bring it in.
Go for it.
We talked about the level of complexity, and
yes.
Talking about all these core updates, talking about all of these different elements, for example, of search engine, optimization. What does that mean? Paid, unpaid, technical versus, it just goes on and on and on, right? And we start talking about that deep domain expertise. It used to be, that somebody would say, I am an online marketer, and be able to cover, the multiple areas that are needed in order to, rank well, get more traffic, grow your brand. And I just don't see that happening anymore. I mean, it has gotten so difficult, and there's so much information, and to keep up with it all, you have to specialize. I mean, right. Am I right or wrong?
Jim, yeah, I need you to be an expert at natural language processing and understand entities in a way that that correlates to what users' intents are when they search, while at the same time, I also need you to memorize JSON LD scripts so we can put in structured data so that our listing really stands out in the SERPs. Can you be both of that, the technical and the content person who understand words and meanings and also understand, really modern day programming, a language that recently came out versus HTML4 from 15 years ago. So you're right. Back in the day when we were SEO specialists, we were analytical and logical in being able to look at data and analytics, draw inferences, create action items, set up and configure goals and events, then jump into technical SEO, code a website, make it fast, make sure that we've got all the right coding and logic and elements that we need to perform well, right URL, site structure, canonical tags. We also needed to be able to be a little bit on the behavioral science side and understanding what the users were looking for. If the user's looking for an upper funnel query, like what, when, how, why, strategies, tips, ideas, we need a long form page of content to have, the most helpful page possible, and then drive them back through remarketing or hopefully get them to link to the content by encouraging it. And at the same time, putting up lower funnel content and understanding sales principles, trust, reciprocity, urgency, scarcity, all the things that we need to do to convince that user who hit that page that we're the right product or service for them to purchase. But at the same time, we also need to be charismatic enough to pick up the phone and say, hey, I would love to collaborate with you in hopes of earning a link back to your website. So you've got to be this introverted extrovert. But in today's ecosystem, like you said, it's so complex that it almost doesn't make sense to have one person spearheading all of those things. And if you do find that person, don't let them go, because they're far and few of the digital marketers out there. They make up for less than 2%, of what's available out there. Somebody who can be that multidiscipline personality and being able to not just understand the what, but be able to do the how as well. It just doesn't exist, right? There's just, like I said, less than 2%. So we hire, a very passionate, strategic, technical SEO person who loves SEO, that we don't have to keep trying to argue with them as to why we need something done. They're bought into it and they love it and they enjoy it. We need somebody on the writing side, maybe two people, one who can write really good, casual, conversational, upper funnel content that people would want to link to attract links and sharing and curation and to grow our brand offline, and somebody who can write really good, convincing, persuasive sales content. Maybe that's the same content writer. I don't know. Again, it's, it depends on what you get, but they also have to be analytical to look to see if their content is performing well. And of all the writers we've worked with, it's been very difficult to find writers who really want to quantify the work that they did. I like to write. Just tell me what you want me to write. Tell me what keywords to use and where to use them. I'll fill in the blanks and then I'll move on to the next page. Well, aren't you interested to see if your page is ranking? Aren't you interested to see how much traffic your page is doing? Don't you want to know what the page that's beating you in the search results is doing and how you could get better? Most of the time they don't. They just want to write. They're creative people. They're not analytics. So you're right. It is a challenging industry. It's a hard thing to address, because not only do you have to have somebody who's good at what they do, you have to find somebody who's passionate enough to make sure that what they're doing is playing a role in the results that you're looking toward. And that's where it all comes together with KPIs. It all comes together with setting some specific goals and saying the next year, web developer, looking at these different areas: security, accessibility, mobile friendliness, conversion rate optimization, dwell time or bounce rate. Let's set a goal in the next year to get to this number. And then every month, let's check in to see how close we're getting to hitting that number. All right, content writers, here's our goal for the year. We've done our road mapping in the last 3 months to know every page we need to create and where it should be organized. We've built that out in a project management system, or maybe just a Google sheet of all the URLs we need to pay attention to. Let's set some goals for the next year of what we want to get done and where we want to be with them. And let's touch base every month and see how we're doing. All right, outreach person, we saw where our competitors have links. We know what our competitive baseline is right now. Let's set a plan. Let's tackle it based on where we feel like we're going to get the most referral traffic, not just links. And then in a year from now, let's look back and run a delta and see where we ended up. And then you pull all that together with your analytics guy or girl to make sure that that every month you are seeing growth, not just in keyword rankings, but in leads and revenue and in traffic. And as long as you're doing that, as long as you set those KPIs and you're revisiting the progress on how you're hitting those KPIs every month with those team members, you're going to continue to see growth. It's inevitable.
Well, and as you're talking there, I mean, it's obvious that this is the long play, right?
Yes.
Somebody who's sitting there and saying, "Hey, I need customers now." Well, that's a different strategy and approach that needs to be taken.
Right.
And then the other thing when you started talking about that is, I started thinking about how, maybe let's just call it promise of online businesses that was probably being touted. Well, actually, it's still being touted. Were they saying, "Hey, you can get online and you can do business with these other organizations who are much larger," and this, and I just don't. I don't see that. I think we have to be realistic to say that used to be an easy thing to do. But now talking about things that all we just have been talking about for the last several minutes is it's not as easy as you think. So if I'm going to go up against, this organization that's been around for, 5 years or more, they have all of this in place. I don't. I mean, am I really going to disrupt them? I don't think so.
You can still get a piece of it, and you can work your way up to it. And in 2 to 5 years from now, you could be a competitor to be reckoned with. It does take some nurturing. It does take some learning about what the competitors are doing. We worked with Public Storage for many years, and we watched the marketing lead there, Dave Collins. Every month, he loved to look at the competitors' changes to their website. Every month, we'd compare up, what did they change on their property page, on their city page, on their search results page. What's the difference in desktop and mobile, and what those changes look like, so that we can pay attention to what the industry is doing and what our competitors are testing in an effort to get better. And a lot of times, when you visit your competitors' websites, you automatically get into their remarketing lists. You can see their sequences, you can see the ads and the networks that they're using to try to target you with. And you can learn from that. You can start to test your own sequences, test your own second follow-ups, test your own second pages that you send them to after they visit, the first version of that page. It does take time and it does take nurturing, but with a sharp, organized SEO lead, you can really sit down and start planning out, your first round of doing that. In the first quarter, you're learning a lot. In the second quarter, you'll throw out the things that didn't work and you'll start chipping away at the things that do. But I don't think it's impossible. I've seen attorneys start from nothing, and within a year, their organic traffic looks like a hockey stick, because they've got those landing pages so much more helpful than their competition. They're faster loading, they're easier to use, they're convincing. They've got social proof, they've got all the attributes that their users are looking for. They took their reviews and they turn those into their unique selling propositions on the page. When people say nice things about why they work with those clients, and they put those on the page, makes such a difference in whether a user decides to stay or whether they go, "Oh, another attorney site, click, go back." They've got the mouse over the back arrow ready to go. So if we can't convince them in 2 seconds or less, then we're going to lose them. So yeah, I think, not without going off on a tangent, I think that's the big picture for me is really looking at that whole sequence and planning out our strategy for the next year or two.
Well, and I think what you just revealed right there is that critical element of being doing that investigation, doing the assessment, doing the strategy development. And I would dare to say that has changed significantly over the past, heck, probably 18 months, especially when I'm starting to talk about B2B, because,
right.
You mentioned doing a lot of B2C work, well, COVID essentially closed the gap between B2C and B2B, like anything we've ever seen before. And
sure.
A whole lot of B2B companies have gone under because of it. And a whole lot of B2B companies have, scattered, and are sitting there as trying to figure out what to do still. And some that have been fortunate enough because they understood that this is the path and had already started down that transformation are much well ahead of everyone else. But I think the level of work that has to go into the whole strategy piece and all of that has changed. So if you could, I think it would be helpful to say, okay, if we were going to do all of this front end work and this strategy, work in the year of 2015. It kind of looked like this. If we did it today, this is what it looks like.
Sure. I think we were really aggressive on lower funnel strategies in 2015. We really wanted to force feed our way into the top of the search results for keywords that drove customers, and that works for a lot of businesses. And then by 2021, all businesses have those pages. They all have a page that competes with your sales page. But the ones that have survived through the pandemic, the ones that have been watching and listening and learning, have been using tools like Answer the Public, or using the questions filter in SEMrush, right? They've been using upper funnel content to drive brand awareness, to trigger remarketing, to build their email lists, to build their social following, so that they can create content that will be seen by wider audiences and remind one-time visitors to come back and become a customer later on. Those other businesses just kept complaining as their ranking goes down. Well, I used to rank, just get it to rank again. Well, it's not as simple as that. We have to look at what's driving additional traffic. And it's like, well, I don't want all that useless traffic. I want customers. Well, that useless traffic is going to link to your website when they share content they find really helpful. They're going to reference it in articles that they create. Some of them college students on college websites, some of them government officials on government websites, domains that Google gives a little bit more trust to. So I think the ones that survived took the time to identify, putting a full information architecture together of all the different ways that people are searching for, what they do and the attributes of how, when, what, and where, and why they do them, and creating that content underneath, not in a blog post somewhere, but underneath those sales pages, gives your sales pages so much more supportive content. Now you're not competing with one page, you're competing with a section of content. You're more authoritative, you're more helpful, you'll appear for a much wider array of search terms and queries and longer tail searches that people make than the competitor who's competing with you with one page. So I would encourage all B2B businesses, and I understand that the customer journey is much longer. We're not using buy, purchase, order as our call to actions. We're using learn more. We're using, join our webinar, talk to, get a free demo, right? We're being very passive in how we're starting to engage with our customers compared to B2C. But we start by helping. We start by providing the what, how, why, and answering questions, providing strategies, checklists, tips, ideas, heck, recipes, right? We're providing that upper funnel content that they're looking for 6 months, a year, 2 years before they're even ready to purchase from you. And then one day you wake up and you're getting hundreds of thousands of visits to the website. You're earning links organically without having to have a link builder, make phone calls and send emails. And because of that, you're driving people back through your remarketing, and you're getting, the customers that you were hoping for.
Goes back to what we've been talking about, right? Skill level, expertise, planning, all of those things have shifted and changed. And
it takes buy-in too, Jim. Those business owners don't want to do upper funnel. They just want those customer tracking pages. You have to convince the stakeholders that we need to break out of our bubble, and we need to make sure, and our conversion rate across our website is going to go down, but we're going to create segment our customer driving traffic from our link attracting content, so that we can see conversion rates improving on this segment. But overall, our conversion rate is going to tank because we're going to provide so much upper funnel content, that our buying content is going to be minuscule.
So a lot of opportunity exists, right?
Absolutely.
But it does require investment, return, and a longer term viewpoint. Mm-hmm. So I dare to say that when you start talking about things that are out there, very common, you hear them a lot, or maybe even things that have just come up and said, hey, you got to do this right now because of whatever reason. You probably find a lot of things that are just overrated. So sure. If I start looking at the landscape of, digital marketing, online marketing, what do you think is pretty overrated right now?
That's a tough one. SEO is a little bit of everything. It's a little bit of testing, and sometimes the weirdest things make a difference. Sometimes it's like I'd mentioned, just using some words that somebody used in a review, as part of your byline on a page, suddenly you start seeing higher conversion rates and longer stay times. So it's interesting. There's definitely a lot of snake oil. I'll say that. There's the techniques of, using private blog networks and, Fiverr to buy links. Anything that you're doing to try to game or manipulate results is eventually going to come back and bite you. So I would stay away from technique, and I would focus on strategy. And I think if you've mapped out that roadmap and you know what you're going to be working on and when you're going to be working on it for the next year, it's really just checking off boxes and high-fiving each other within the team every month. But yeah, what else do people kind of stick to? I think creating content for the sake of creating content, that drives me crazy. I've got a client who it took months to convince him to stop doing this, but he's like, we need at least 3 blog posts every day, and I'm like, how good is that blog post going to be compared to the page that ranks for the keyword that blog post is supposed to address? Because I look at those top pages and it looks like they put a lot of time and energy into it. They've got video, they've got graphics and maybe even an infographic. They've got testimonial or they've got an expert's feedback, an interview. They've got quotes. They've got external references to highly authoritative content like government essays and so forth. And you're just whipping up random content because you think that putting new content on the website is going to have a freshness signal and you're going to keep ranking. What you're doing is you're creating a ratio of unhelpful content. And when Google and Bing look at your website holistically, and you've got 100,000 pages and 90,000 of them are these useless little blog posts that you're putting out to create fresh content, they're going to say, well, really, this website's not very helpful as a whole, because most of the content I rarely show in my search results. And when I do, users generally come back to my results and choose a competing listing. So I think that's the biggest thing, is stop creating content for the sake of creating content. If you're not going to create the best page, and look at the top ranking pages for the keyword that you're thinking about creating the page for. And if there isn't a keyword for the page, do we really need it? Are people going to find it? I suppose if you're doing something like About Us, if you're doing an About Us page or Why Work With Us, sure, those are important. But beyond that, if you're just creating a page just to create a page, I would say talk to an SEO strategist first, or make sure it aligns with what your content strategy is and that your page is going to be the best. Take a week, a month if you need to, and create the best content. I'd rather have 10 amazing pages on a website than 10,000 pages where most of them are just thin content and are useless.
Yeah, it goes back to what you had mentioned earlier, being the EAT that everybody talks about, expertise, authority, and trust.
Absolutely.
That is what is now, making the difference in what ranks and what doesn't rank.
Yeah, look at Healthline. If you want a good example of how to address EAT, any of the articles you'll find on Healthline have all the best practices. They have the short summary at the top that they want as their featured answer in Google that people will copy and curate. They've got a perfect jump to list table of contents for every page so that they can address the passages update and have individual sections rank as opposed to the whole page. They've got external references to authoritative medical documentation where they use superscript and a number as opposed to keyword-rich anchors. They use those internally to help boost pages within the website. So look at some of those Helpline pages because they've done just a phenomenal job, and they rank number 1 for just about every keyword that they attempt to, because their page structure and the way that they've optimized their pages is just on point.
Well, as you're talking, I also start thinking about the humanizing of the internet. So essentially, Google, when you start looking at some of the things that they're presenting from a communication perspective on some of these algorithm changes that they're making, essentially, they're trying to improve that, and they'll say it, trying to improve the customer experience, member experience, user experience, so that, what is coming up on search rankings, is, the best that's out there, going back to the whole EAT thing. Okay. And so they're trying to become and ascertain and assess from a human perspective, what is a good experience, right? So if I start talking about and thinking about, Google, becoming more human, and you mentioned all this as well. You talk about behavior analytics, behavioral, understanding and all of that is, how do I make sure that, I am essentially now serving two masters,
Right.
I'm serving the Google master because that's the 10,000 pound gorilla. Okay. The Google master, and then also, the actual, user themselves.
Of
How do
course.
you do that?
Right. Well, it kind of goes back to the three kind of basic principles of SEO, right? The first is making sure our page is the most relevant. And we do that. And the easiest way to do that is simply taking your page and the top ranking page, throwing it into something like Amazon Mechanical Turk and asking visitors, which page would you choose if you were looking for this product or service and why? And then you take all those answers and you theme them based on their similarities, run a pivot table and find out what is it they like about that top page, the user likes about that top page, or the search engine might like about that top page. Second is, off-page signals. Are we doing enough with our digital marketing to make sure that Googlebot and Bingbot are finding us, our brand name, our entity, in correlation to the keywords that we want to appear for off the website, not just on it? Thirdly is user behavior signals. And this is where it gets into a little bit more of what you're talking about. When a user sees 10 results, are they choosing us more so than the competition because we stand out with some of the great rich results we have, like FAQs under our listing or star ratings or a video or image thumbnail, right? Do we stand out in the search results? Are we using a call to action and a unique selling proposition in our titles and descriptions, or do we just shove keyword and brand in there and hope that that users will want to click on us because magically they just want to, right? So I think that user behavior signal of them wanting to click on us more often than the competition and then staying there because that relevancy signal kicks in is paramount. So that's where you address both. And if a user isn't converting, then they're probably going back to the search engine and choosing a competing result. And long term, that user behavior signal is going to demote your listing if they're not staying on your website after they click on you more so than they clicked on the competing listings.
Well, as you're saying that, it goes back to what I was looking at, that comparison of the larger organization that has the resources and has the team, has the people, or, they're working with a partner that has that capability,
Sure.
versus somebody else who's trying to gain that skill. I start wondering, about the whole budget associated with it and where I'm going to allocate and where I'm going to spend. So if
Sure.
I say if I'm a digital marketer, B2B digital marketer, and I did have unlimited funds, right?
Sure.
What would you actually give them as advice on what they should do?
Oh, we could have a lot of fun. Well, first is choosing the right platform to work with. If you're a pretty large enterprise, I would suggest Conductor Searchlight. Conductor is a fantastic enterprise tool that hits almost every single one of the different disciplines that we look at, from content strategy and competitor insights, with a integrated project management system, task management system. So you can take one of the key suggestions and assign it to somebody in the task management system in real time. So I pick an enterprise platform. If Conductor doesn't suit you, there's BrightEdge, there's Searchmetrics, there's several others that are out there. Those are the big ones. Let's start with that platform, right? Really look at those aggregate competitor insights so that you know where you stand right now compared to the competition. What's my share of voice for the selling keywords that I want to rank for? What's my share of voice for the upper funnel search terms I want to go after? What's my striking distance list of keywords that I'm on page 2? And if I give a little bit of love to, I can move to page 1 quickly and see an immediate impact to visits and hopefully to leads. So I would start there. Choose the right platform, load up all the search terms from your competitor insights and from your own search console and Google Ads data. Put all those search terms in there, and then start to map them to the pages that correspond to those words. And I think you're going to find that probably 80% of them don't exist, and you have to create new expansion content to address those different search terms. And there's your content strategy for the year, right? You got immediately within a few minutes, and pulling all of that competitor insight, identified the content opportunities for the next year or two based on what's driving traffic to your competition. So I'd start there. I'd start with an enterprise suite, and then I would start with the procurement of those team members. Who's my technical SEO? Who are my writers? Who's my outreach person for link building? And I hate to say it, but a web data analyst. We work with 2 amazing restaurant chains right now, and neither of them have a web data analyst. They've got this incredible analytics suite by Google, and no one's running it. It's like, so all the different team members are all piecemealing what they need from it, but get a web data analyst in there, even if it's only a couple hours a week. They come in on Fridays, they look at, web data, in analytics or in, whichever tool you happen to be using, and provide some insights, some observations, some inferences, maybe even some actionables to each team member. Hey, I don't know if you guys realize this, but you've got, 8,000 people that are hitting, 404 pages. Here are the URLs that they're hitting. Maybe we should redirect those. Developer's like, I got it. Right. And then he goes back to the content writer. Oh, what page do you want me to redirect these to? So that collaboration sometimes starts, with the web data analyst, which most organizations just don't have.
Steve, very enlightening, man. I had a fun time chatting with you. How does the
Thank you.
B2B DM gang get in touch with you?
I'm easy to find. My handle is SEO Steve everywhere. In fact, if you want to use SEO Steve, it's a promo code on our Academy of Search. If you want free access to a similar course I teach at Cal State Fullerton, free to use. It's a $600 program, but I'd love for your listeners to give me some feedback and enjoy the same course and templates we talked about today, Jim. So if they'd like to, just go to academyofsearch.com, punch in SEO Steve, and get free access to my program. And I'd love to hear your feedback.
Steve Wiideman, thank you for sharing your knowledge and wisdom, and we wish you the very best.
Thank you, Jim.
Thank you for joining us. Go now to join the B2B DM gang in the B2B Marketer LinkedIn group, where you can connect with other B2B DM disruptors and get access to our B2B DM cheat sheets, checklist, and guides. While you're at it, if you found value in this show, please help by going to iTunes to rate, review, and subscribe. And share the show on all of your digital platforms. Be sure to tune in next week for our next episode. And always remember, you can automate your lead capture, but you must lure your lead.